Dr. Umar. I heard it's funny enough, my mom just actually woke up. We call ourselves pretty and woke.
Okay.
But yeah, so I just wanted to know, you said something in an interview, I think at the Breakfast Club, and you said cultural commitment. And I wanted you to tell us more about that. And listen to what your event is tomorrow. I think that kind of piggybacks off of cultural commitment.
Yes, you speak of commitment, which is another one of those 5 assessments, which basically speaks to how far are you willing to go to help liberate African people. Some of us are willing to lose our job, but we're not willing to die. Some of us are willing to lose our white friends, but we're not willing to lose our house in the white neighborhood. So that's commitment. And when you deal with commitment, you're speaking of it in terms of relativity, because there's no such thing as absolute commitment.
Right.
You might be more committed than everyone in this room, but there's someone out there who's more committed than you are.
Okay, that's true. Because I was gonna say, how do I have my power and my commitment if I don't have the sources, the income or a home or the power to help our people?
Well, I would argue that the income in a home is often a barrier to your commitment. What I find today is black people who have that education, who are in a privileged position, that privileged position often becomes a barrier to them reaching back to help other African people. If you look at what's going on in the NFL right now, where you have these very aggressive alpha males, our black athletes, particularly our NFL athletes in particular, they're gladiators, they're warriors. They're some of the biggest, meanest men you'll ever see in your life. But when it comes to confronting white supremacy, structural inequity, racism, and systemic discrimination, they are some of the most cowardly black men I've ever seen in my life. Ray Lewis, Shaquille O'Neal, Lil Wayne, just to name a few of the most ridiculous excuses for black men I've seen over the past couple of weeks and what they've had to say out of their mouths on national television. I mean, for Lil Wayne to sit up there and say he's never dealt with racism. You are from Louisiana. You are a richly melanated black man from the inner city. First of all, there's no black man in America. I think we would all agree that Barack Obama may have been the most privileged black man ever. Even he has had to deal with racism. I know rich black males, they have had to deal with racism. I know biracial black males, they have had to deal with racism. But you want to sit up here on national TV and go as far as to lie. That was a lie. Go as far as to lie and say you never dealt with racism because you're too afraid to speak up on behalf of your people who are suffering from police genocide, given the fact that you've made millions of dollars off of rehearsing and revamping negative stereotypes of black women and black men. I mean, your songs is about killing black folks, selling dope, exploiting black women.
One of the people we want to stand on the front line. Now, if he was well versed in understanding and not faded all the time, then we would he has to stand up for us because his money is his power, but he's not there.
What he said was unjustifiable regardless of how you look at it, but I think the pill could have been better swallowed had he not made such or built for himself such a lucrative estate on the backs of black stereotypes.
It's true.
So it's one thing that you benefit yourself off of negative caricatures of black people, and then you turn right around and defend white folks. So you've already hurt us with your music, and you're going to turn around and hurt us again with defending white folks. Nobody should ever buy another Lil Wayne album in their life.
I don't.
I just want to say, I'm excited, you know what I'm saying? Dr. Umar Johnson, so you getting me hyped. But one thing I got to know is because, you know what I'm saying, a lot of questions coming on. I got to know, they call this the woke movement, I'm sorry, and they're talking about, everyone opening their eyes to see the truth and everything. How did you get into the point where you're not, what did you read, what did you study, what made you become, made you take steps and become the person you are right now? Was there someone that you listened to? Is there someone you idolized? Did someone pass it down to you? Is it when you went to school? What made you, become the person you are today and, self-educate yourself? Or what did you do to reach out and get the information that you have right now?
For me, it was very early. Elementary school. We had a mandatory black history class in elementary school in North Philadelphia. It wasn't mandatory for the school district. It just so happened that we had it in my elementary school. So 4th and 5th grade, we had Mrs. Green. She was our black history teacher, who I coincidentally ran into for the first time since then, not too long ago. But I think that she either lit in me or awakened in me that spark to know who I was and to fight for our people. And when I talked to some of my friends who were around back then, who was in that class with me, they've always saw me as quote unquote the black revolutionary type. It was something I thought I really didn't develop until middle school, 7th and 8th grade. But as one of my buddies, Jonathan, told me, he said, nah, dog, you was talking that stuff in the 4th grade. So I believe I was always this way, and I think that God led me to Miss Green in that Black History class that really woke it up. There was a Black History oratorical contest, and I entered into it, and I won 1st place in 4th grade, and then again 1st place in 5th grade. But when we came back for the 6th grade year, there was no Black History class. And that's when I learned that this was optional, it wasn't required. But right around that time, my father took me to Baltimore, Maryland, where I got an opportunity to participate in our first family reunion. And so we're walking in the back of a church, and there's a whole bunch of Frederick Douglass memorabilia, his clothing, his Bible, some of his letters, his jacket, big paintings. And I asked my father, and I never forget, because we stayed at the Days Inn in Baltimore Harbor, and I almost drowned in that pool that same trip. So I'll never forget the first family reunion. And I asked him why was all this Frederick Douglass memorabilia in the back of this church, and he said, because you're related to him. And so I think the 4th and 5th grade Black History class with the 6th or 7th grade first family reunion, and finding out that I was related to arguably the greatest Black leader in American history, I think that pretty much solidified.
That put a real boost into you.
Yeah, because I felt obligated to try to honor his work, you know, in my own work. Not to say that we would agree on everything, because we would clearly have differences. In fact, Martin Delaney, who co-edited the North Star newspaper with Frederick Douglass, was one of the fathers of revolutionary Pan-African nationalism, who was also from Pennsylvania, as am I, and grew up in a city called Chambersburg, which is the same city where I went to high school. And if you look at the differences between Delaney and Douglass, which were reintroduced into Black consciousness between Martin and Malcolm to some degree, because Frederick Douglass was not a proponent of nonviolence. He very much believed in violence, even though he was an integrationist. So we would disagree on some things, but at the end of the day, I think we would agree that we have to do something different from what we are doing to try to liberate Black people. Just a couple things. Number one, we as a people have lost our honor and integrity. We are willing to sell almost anything to get rich or be famous. That's not how we used to be. We had honor, we had integrity, we had values, we had principles, we had standards. We've lost that. See, the millennials are the grandchildren of that first generation of baby mamas that came about in the mid-1970s. That first generation of baby mamas was that last generation of Black people to even remotely see with their own two eyes what the Black struggle was against white supremacy. Their children, which would be us, we did not see it at all, but we heard the stories. This generation, the millennials, the grandchildren, they not only did not see it, they haven't even heard about it. And as a result of that, I think that the current generation is potentially our greatest, but also potentially our worst, because everything that we fought for, they now are in a position to eliminate it. It bothers me when I see young people be more concerned with gay sex than Black freedom, more concerned with multiculturalism than Black justice. And in the millennial generation, I've seen white supremacy has done an excellent job of distracting them with everyone else's struggle but our own. I remember after the Donald Trump inauguration, there was the protest by the women against Donald Trump. And then obviously with his executive orders against the immigrants shutting down the borders, I saw Black people protesting for the right for Arabs and Mexicans and other people to come into America. I found that rather ironic, because when you study immigration in American history, you will see that whenever they brought Chinese, Arab, East Indian, Mexican into America, it was to replace us in the labor sector. They brought them in specifically to make sure that you could do nothing but commit crime and go to jail. So when you see Black people jumping up, helping people who have never helped you, would never help you, and cannot stand you, it just speaks to how politically uneducated we are. And with our scholars, they talk a lot about the historical and cultural education, which is important. Knowing your culture, who you are, very important. But that cannot replace a political education. A political education not only tells you what's happening now, but why. And until we understand what's happening now and why, we will always be in the wilderness of ignorance. Barack Obama, case in point. Many black people are still deluded into believing that he was some sort of divine blessing sent to black people. He was actually a political curse, because everything that's happening under the Trump administration was carried into action by way of Obama's lack of accountability to black folk. This police genocide didn't start with Trump. It started with Obama. The taking back of rights of African Americans, that didn't begin with Donald Trump. That started with a black president who did absolutely nothing for black people while we sat down and applauded him and was afraid to speak up against injustice because we didn't want to make his stay in office anything rocky. Because they have economic relationships with these people. Remember, George Bush's father was in an oil partnership with Osama bin Laden's father. Okay, so you have businesses at stake. But the other reason is because we're the only non-white ethnicity. Black people are the only non-white ethnic group in the United States who cannot be deported. Anyone else who misbehaves politically, economically, can be sent back home. You can send Arabs home. You can send Mexicans home. You can send European Jews home. You know, you can send East Indians home. Everyone has an international homeland that they can be sent back to except you. Ironically, it is white people to blame for why they cannot deport you, because slavery destroyed your psychological connection to your ancestral homeland. So the average black person in America does not consider themselves to be an African, and a white man can think himself for that manifestation. Okay, so what do you do to get rid of a people you do not want but cannot deport? You have to create a system of genocide from within. So that's the mass incarceration. That's the black on black fratricide. That's the police genocide. That's the AIDS, the Ebola, the West Nile, and of course white supremacy's greatest weapon, and that is homosexuality and lesbianism.
So I have a question. So you consider yourself the prince of Pan-Africanism. So why is it important for you to label yourself as such, and why don't more black kids or boys, people know about this?
Well, the label comes from our community. I'm known as the Prince of Pan-Africanism.
Okay.
Okay. Now, as far as we say, why don't more of our children learn about?
Why is it important to say Pan-Africanism? Like it's Pan. Why you have to say? Okay, they labeled you the Prince because they put you on that pedestal. That's dope. But why is it that? What is the meaning, the strength behind it?
Okay. I'm a therapist. In mental health, every psychologist and every school of psychology teaches you to address mental illness from a particular ideological perspective. So you have cognitive therapists, you have cognitive behavioral therapists, you have psychodynamic therapists, you have Gestalten therapists, you have pure behaviorists. They believe in order to successfully solve any problem, it must be theoretically grounded in a particular world perspective. Just like in America, you have Democrats, you have Republicans. Those are political ideologies. Okay, the Republicans believe you can best protect the nation by approaching things from a conservative standpoint. Democrats believe that you can best save the country by approaching things from a liberal standpoint. I'm saying all that to say that ideology guides everything that we do. If you're a Christian, you believe that the best way that you can safeguard your spirit and get your blessings on earth is to acknowledge Jesus as your Lord and Savior. If you're Muslim, you believe to acknowledge there's no God but Allah. So everything has ideology. And I would argue that there's no sphere of human endeavor where ideology is more important than politics or human survival. So we have all kinds of ideologies, okay? You have Nation of Islam, God and Earth, Nuwapian, the Moors, the Socialists, the Pan-Africanists, which is our oldest formal political ideology. None of them existed before Pan-Africanism, because Pan-Africanism is as old as African people. And I could summarize it in three basic principles. Principle number one, all people of African descent, whether they're light-skinned, dark-skinned, Muslim or Christian, whether they speak in Spanish or Yoruba or Igbo or Swahili or Ebonics in South Florida, we're all one family. And that we should identify on the level of that family before we identify on any other level. So being an African is more important than being a Muslim. It's more important than being a Christian. It's more important than being Greek, an elk, a black professional, anything you into. Nothing is more important than your Africanity. And why? Because it's the only membership you have that God chose. Everything you belong to, you chose, except your race. Second, we believe that as Africa goes, so goes all African people. okay? Which is to say that the respect you get is a direct reflection of the respect given to your international homeland. So I just came back from China for the first time, in Japan, speaking to Africans there. Wherever you see Chinese in the world, they get respected.
Yeah.
I just came back from Cuba, they're respected there. Just came back from the Bahamas, they're respected there. Wherever you go, Chinese are respected. Wherever you go, European Jews are respected. Why? Because China is respected. Israel is respected. And in contradiction to that, wherever you go where black people are, even in Africa, which is our homeland, we are disrespected. Until Africa is strong, we will be weak. And we would argue that one of the reasons black America, black Canada, black UK, black Caribbean haven't made more political, economic, and social progress in the past 50 years is because we keep on disconnecting our regional struggle from the international African struggle. And the last point of Pan-Africanism, because there's many but just three. The third one that I would speak of is we believe in self-determination in all things. That means whatever it is to be done for African people must be done by African people. So there is no non-African participation in our movements or in our struggles, which includes our institutions. And the most sacred of those institutions is the black family. So that means the black man must unequivocally commit himself to a black woman, and the black woman must unequivocally commit herself to a black man. What is to be done for black people must be done by black people.
Well,